Depending on your church background, have you ever heard this before? Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew in me a clean spirit. Cast me not away from your presence, and turn not your Holy Spirit from me. If you come from a liturgical church, this may sound like the first half of something that you may have sang during an offertory or something like that. It's something that comes out of Psalms 51. You guys here in a second will go through and read that, but I want you to think about what this section of the Bible is really saying. It's this idea of restoration and purification, something that we all desire. It's crucial to the entire story of creation and eventually the coming of Jesus Christ. But I think what happens is a lot of people tend to forget that there are actually different components to restoration. You see, to become truly renewed, you really need fundamentally two things. It's two things that you see inside this section of Psalm 51. The first thing that you end up seeing is forgiveness, that there's an idea of acknowledging the rebellion of what you have done. You see, that's where we really get into what is sin, that sin is this heart of rebellion against God. And so there has to be forgiveness of what has occurred in the past. But then there's a second component. So the second component is where you start getting into the actual purification. That purification, wanting to be a new thing, be something that is not encumbered by the past. But you have to have both parts of it to be truly renewed. That forgiveness piece and the purification piece. I want you to think about this hypothetical. What if somebody came up to you who had offended you, or they had done something to you, or maybe double-crossed you, whatever the case may be. And imagine that this individual comes up to you and they want forgiveness, but yet they don't show any desire to actually become something new, to become purified. They don't want to become purified. They just want to get forgiveness about the past transgression, then move on with their life. You know, that's probably going to leave a little bit of a bitter taste in your mouth, right? Well, now I want you to think about somebody who's missing the other part of this equation. Think about the exact same hypothetical individual, or maybe you're thinking of an actual situation, and imagine that this individual, maybe they do want to move on, but they don't want to acknowledge the offense of the past. They don't really show that they want any kind of forgiveness. They just want to say, let's just pretend like nothing ever occurred, and then kind of move on with things. Well, likewise, that also would kind of leave us with this bitter taste in our mouth. But what you can see David saying here in this Psalm 51 is he is crying out to God for forgiveness of his rebellion, and then begging that God make him a new creation, would purify him, would actually renew him in total. And that's really what God desires. Yet, a lot of us will be just like that hypothetical person that we were just pontificating about. They'll say that they want forgiveness, but then they don't really want to change. They don't really want purification. Or they might be the other way around. They may say, God, I want you to make me something new. I want you to make me the creation that you have planned. But they don't really want to acknowledge those deep, darker parts of their life that maybe they haven't really handed over to God yet. And just the exact same way that we said that it would probably leave a bitter taste in your mouth if somebody tried coming up to you and offering you that very incomplete, seemingly insincere desire for restoration, how do you think God feels when we do it to him? We're all familiar with the story of the prodigal son, right? Well, you know, if that you are familiar with this story, then it's something where you can probably recite the highlights off the top of your head. You know, you have a son, he ends up deciding that he wants his inheritance early because he's ready to go off and to be a grown-up. So he gets his inheritance from his dad, he takes it, he squanders it, and then he ends up not having any material wealth because he doesn't have any material wealth. The fake friends he surrounded himself with have abandoned him, and then he ends up saying, I want to go back home. I want to be restored back to my father, but look at how I've treated him. How can I do that? And so he reasons, these two things that we just talked about, that he needs to acknowledge the sin of his past and then request this sort of restoration, a form of purification. But what you end up seeing is something that I think is really, really interesting. What you'll notice is the son doesn't asked for full restoration. You know, it's almost as if he can't comprehend that total purification is actually possible. But in the story, you see the reaction of the father. The father, as soon as he sees his son approaching him with this heart of forgiveness and wanting restoration, he runs out to his son, embraces him, and then he ends up bringing him in, not just as what the son thought he would be brought in as. He figured that because of his past sins, he'd be brought in as maybe a servant or something, but instead was brought back in and fully restored to his rightful place in the family. There's something really significant there that I think is very easy to overlook, and that is the fact that you have what the prodigal son thought he could be restored as, and then you have what the father was capable of restoring him as. You see, with his limited knowledge of forgiveness and his experiences and whatnot, he just kind of reasoned that restoration could only be so much. But yet the Father had this greater plan. And the reason why I think this is so important is because a lot of us will live the exact same way in our own sin lives. You know, even a lot of us who are trying to do all of the right, good, churchy things. You know, we may have given to God our past transgressions, and then we're trying to live differently. We're trying to live renewed. But I think sometimes what happens in the minds of different individuals is, even though they intellectually know they need to move beyond their guilt, and maybe in certain ways emotionally they have, there's still something in them that feels like they have to earn it, that they need to pay penance somehow for what they did. And so they need to do good enough. They need to serve good enough. They need to act good enough. And that's something that I think can be very, very damaging to individuals' relationship with God. Fun side note, it's one of the reasons why I've always said that even though, trust me, there are plenty of things, even around our little church family, that absolutely could use some help, or some people popping up saying, I'll do this and I'll do that, I won't go and beg anybody to do anything. And the real reason why is because I don't want anybody to feel like they are having to earn their way into God's good graces. If they feel called, then God bless, let's make it happen. But I don't want anybody to feel like they have to earn their way into restoration in God's eyes. And that's exactly what you saw in that prodigal son, that, you know, he couldn't fathom they could be fully restored, and yet he did. And I think this introduces a very, very important thought, and that is that God, a holy, perfect God, a holy, gracious God, is the only one qualified, is the only one who has providence to be able to offer a full and complete set of restoration. And when you consider the fact that that is the type of restoration that God has offered us, it has to make us stop and think for a second about the type of restoration that we will offer to those who have crossed against us. Are we so giving, and are we so forgiving in our own lives? Or are we more miserly? Do we hold back? And do we somehow feel more qualified to hold grudges against individuals who have transgressed against us than God feels against our own transgressions? Now, just a moment ago, we stopped at verse 12 when we were back in Psalms 51. But if you continue on to verse 13, I think there's something there that is very, very key when it comes to our relationship and our understanding of how God purifies us. What David says in verse 13 is, "Then I will teach the rebellious your ways, and sinners will return to you." Now that is really, really big, because what it states is that when we are purified wholly and totally as a result of first seeking forgiveness and then being purified, we are driven towards sharing this testimony with other people. I think a lot of times people think of testimony as being something that is just kind of some kind of dramatic story, but the reality is that testimony includes God being able to do these supernatural things, which includes being able to purify you and make you a new creation despite yourself. There is something that is humbling, and there is something that at the exact same time is spiritually emboldening about embracing the fact that we are flawed and that we have flaws, But thank God, because He has renewed our spirit and He has cleaned us and He has made us something that is capable of being more than what we thought we could be. That is something that we would want to share, and it's something that other individuals can take notice of. I mean, consider how many individuals walk around on a day-to-day basis with guilt over small things, big things, long-term things and short-term things that maybe they have done or that they continue to do. Everybody wants to feel like they are clean. They want to feel renewed. And through Jesus Christ, they have an opportunity for that thing. There's a phrase that I will use frequently. Most of the time when I say it, I'm specifically talking about trying to see things from other people's perspectives, but I think it applies here too. And that is that inside the head of every single person you meet is a movie, and it is playing, and in that movie, they are the main character. And you know what? Nobody is the bad guy in the movie that plays inside their head. Everybody's the good guy. Everybody wants to feel like they're the good guy. And I think that sometimes is difficult for them to reconcile when they end up seeing the different flaws that they have in their life and the things that they do. That is where you have an opportunity to be able to show them that their flaws are not things that they have to heal, that they're not going to be capable of purifying themselves and renewing themselves. That is something that only God has the providence to do. Just as He did with the prodigal son, He is able to forgive with a sense of joy in a way that provides us complete restoration of who we are, not just being able to get over on a case-by-case basis the individual actions that we've done. Restoration is such a precious thing to our faith in general, but it's something that we don't get to experience unless we appreciate the fullness of it, asking for forgiveness for the things that we have done, and then seeking the purification to become a new creation. And if God has done this for us, then how can we possibly keep it to ourselves? We should show this to others so that they will desire the same thing. And then we should be just as eager to offer it to anybody who may have transgressed against us. That's our lesson that we have for today. I hope you're able to get something out of it. Until we can meet again, God bless.